Born during the Italian Renaissance era in the rising city-state of Florence, Lorenzo de' Medici grew into one of the most powerful statesmen of his time. He was an enthusiastic patron of the arts. His money funded some of the best-known pieces of the era, and he would even come to be known as Lorenzo the Magnificent. However, when he died, doctors were baffled as to the cause of his demise, but modern researchers have now uncovered a chilling new theory. Lorenzo di Piero de' Medici was born in 1449 into the Medici family, who were one of the most politically important and rich dynasties during the Italian Renaissance. Their power and wealth had accumulated over time from generations of banking. To get an idea of the life that Lorenzo would lead, one need only look to his grandfather, Cosimo de' Medici. A towering figure, he was the first Medici to lead the Florentine Republic and his family's bank at the same time, and was one of the wealthiest men in all of Europe. Lorenzo's father, Piero, would also continue funding many artistic projects, but he was much less interested in running the family business affairs, while his mother, Lucrezia Tornabuoni, was a talented and smart woman who rubbed elbows with philosophers at the local academy. Of the many Renaissance artists under the Medici's patronage, one of the most famous was Botticelli. Interestingly, Botticelli was able not just to work through their funding, but also took inspiration by using many of them as models for his paintings. This was because many of the Medicis were actually very physically beautiful. However, in comparison with the rest of his family, Lorenzo was described as, quote, plain of appearance. He was more homely looking, had a squashed nose, and was average height with a broad frame and short legs. By contrast, Lorenzo's brother Giuliano was very handsome and modeled more frequently for Botticelli than Lorenzo. However, despite Lorenzo's appearance, his greatest asset was his sharp mind, as he was extremely intelligent. He was also likable and had a reputation for being full of dignity and respect, qualities that would serve him well in life. Because of this, of the 5 children, Lorenzo was deemed the most promising to continue their family legacy, and his parents made sure to nurture his aptitudes and skills. Well, growing up, Lorenzo tried his hand at many activities, including hawking, hunting, horse breeding, and most particularly, jousting. Jousting happened to be one of his most favored passions, and in 1469, he participated in a grand tournament, emerging in first place. His victory in the tournament at such a young age attracted much attention from the storytellers of the era, and was his first taste of many glories. To make sure that Lorenzo gained real-world experience, while still in his youth, he participated in several important diplomatic missions, meeting many political and religious figures of the time, and even visited Rome to converse with the Pope. In February 1469, Lorenzo married Clarice Orsini. The Orsinis were a prominent Roman family, and the marriage was a diplomatic one. The couple would go on to have 10 children, but as was common for the time, only 6 survived to adulthood. However, they would add one more when Lorenzo's brother Giuliano died, taking in his nephew, Giulio, who would actually later ascend to the papacy as Pope Clement VII. After all his training and preparation, Lorenzo finally took some degree of power when he assumed a leading role in the state of Florence after the demise of his uncle and then father. He was only 20 years old. With his father and uncle now gone, Lorenzo found himself without any Medici elders to advise his leadership. He would enlist the help of his mother, Lucrezia, to become one of his closest counsels. Although the Medici family were not the official rulers of Florence, their vast wealth put them in a powerful position to influence the politics of the city-state, essentially making them de facto rulers. Like his grandfather and father before him, Lorenzo ruled indirectly by paying off city councilors, as well as arranging strategic marriages to better his family's position. Aside from using money to influence politics, Lorenzo also continued his family's legacy of philanthropy, donating vast sums to charity, always paying his fair share of taxes, and investing in many new buildings. By 1471, He estimated that his family had spent around 663,000 florins on public goods since 1434, which is about 460 million US dollars in today's money. Lorenzo was more than happy to do this, and even said himself, quote, "Though many would consider it better to have a part of that sum in their purse, I consider it to have been a great honor to our state." As the Medici's dominance over Florentine life and politics continued to grow, it was only natural that rival families grew resentful of them. Many of them posed great threats to Lorenzo's rule, with the Pazzi family being the most dangerous of these enemies. Like the Medicis, the Pazzis were also a wealthy Florentine banking family, albeit smaller, and they strongly resented the Medicis for their control and power over the city-state's finances and politics. This simmering resentment would later boil over in the most dramatic fashion. As he continued to rise in society, and despite the jealousy of rival families, Lorenzo came to be known as Lorenzo the Magnificent. Continuing his contributions to his legacy, he became one of the most powerful patrons of the arts in all of Italy. The vast sums he put forward would inspire other wealthy Europeans to do the same, spurring on the Renaissance. He sponsored many great artists, including painters such as Piero, Andrea del Verrocchio, Domenico Ghirlandaio, and of course, the continued support for Botticelli. However, arguably the biggest artist under his patronage was none other than the great sculptor and painter, Michelangelo. He was close to the Medicis and had lived with them for 3 years, often dining with them and engaging in philosophical discussions. Aside from patronage and banking, Lorenzo was also an artist in his own right, and his preferred medium was written verse in his native Tuscan language. He wrote many verses about love, feasts, the wonders of life, as well as the melancholy of the human condition. Lorenzo's grandfather had collected many pieces of literature over his lifetime, and the books he accumulated became the Medici Library. Lorenzo greatly expanded upon the library during his reign and added numerous classics. In his desire to spread knowledge, he also funded the copying and dissemination of many great works throughout Europe. He was a passionate proponent of humanist ideas, which was a stance that emphasized individual and societal potential and a precursor to the Enlightenment. Lorenzo supported his close circle of scholarly humanist philosophers and assisted them in attempting to merge the ideas of Plato with Christianity. However, this behavior would ruffle the feathers of some of the most powerful in Italy. During this era, Italy was broken up into several city-states as a result of a treaty known as the Italic League of 1454. Despite this peace, Pope Sixtus IV, leader of the Catholic Church, had territorial ambitions and plotted against the Medici family with the help of their rivals, the Pazzis. In April 1478, the Pazzi conspiracy, in collusion with the Pope, reached its climax. In the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore, Lorenzo and his brother Giuliano were attacked by a trio of men that included Francesco de Pazzi and the Archbishop of Pisa. During the encounter, Giuliano was killed, while Lorenzo was lucky to escape with his life. The people of Florence, who were generally fond of the Medicis, were incensed by news of the conspiracy. The populace rallied to their defense, and things got out of hand when they lynched many members of the Pazzi family, as well as the Archbishop of Pisa. When the Pope learned of just how poorly his plan turned out, he was furious. The Medicis emerged from this debacle more powerful than before, and with even greater support. Pope Sixtus responded harshly. He seized all the Medici assets that he could find, excommunicated Lorenzo, as well as the government of Florence, and put the entire city-state under interdict, thus prohibiting them from partaking in any church rites. Despite all these measures, Lorenzo and his family remained unfazed, with their support still standing strong. The Pope then escalated the situation when he formed a military alliance with King Ferdinand I of Naples and launched a full-scale invasion of the Florentine Republic. The war lasted from 1478 to 1480, and saw Florence's resources stretched thin as papal and Neapolitan forces attacked Tuscan territories. However, Lorenzo's strong leadership during this time of crisis would be instrumental in the city's survival. With these new attacks on Florentine territory, Lorenzo chose a bold and unorthodox response. In the midst of war, he personally sailed directly to Naples and willingly became a prisoner of King Ferdinand. Although an extremely risky decision, the King of Naples was impressed with his bravery, diplomatic skills, and charisma, and agreed to withdraw from the war, effectively isolating the Pope and ending the crisis. Lorenzo returned to Florence a hero. As a result of his new success, he was also able to negotiate constitutional changes within the Florentine Republic's government that enhanced his own personal power. These changes included the creation of the Council of 70 in 1480, which centralized power into the hands of Medici loyalists, transforming Florence's republic into a more controlled regime under Lorenzo's influence. After this experience of war, Lorenzo became determined to institute peace throughout Italy. He pursued policies to balance the power between the northern Italian states and helped keep other major European powers out of Italy. He also maintained good relations with the Ottoman Empire, a major source of trade and revenue for Florence. Despite their position, no dynasty lasts forever, and the Medici's grip on power would eventually fade. When Lorenzo took control, the family assets had already been under strain from the many ambitious building projects undertaken by his grandfather. The wealth would only dwindle further during Lorenzo's tenure. Mismanagement, costly wars, political expenses, and a series of poor loans caused the Medici family's financial standing to collapse, forcing them to close several branches of the bank. As the financial difficulties became too much for Lorenzo to bear, he made the drastic decision to misappropriate state and trust funds. His efforts would prove mostly unsuccessful, and their influence finally began to wane when the public lost confidence in them. As their power lessened, Lorenzo's health began to deteriorate until he finally succumbed to his ailments at the age of 43 in April 1492. Medical practitioners at the time were confused as to the cause of Lorenzo's illness and demise. But thanks to modern science, scientists now have a new theory as to what really happened. His reported symptoms, as well as later analysis of Lorenzo's skeleton, suggested the excessive excretion of growth hormone. It is now believed that he may have suffered from a rare disorder known as acromegaly. Despite the financial issues and tumultuous times, Lorenzo had remained a steadfast diplomat to the very end. He had negotiated, supported, and held up the Peace of Lodi, a treaty which had maintained stability in Italy. After he was gone, the peace quickly collapsed, and Charles VIII of France invaded Italy, marking the start of the Italian Wars and the end of Florence's golden age. Lorenzo's steady influence was greatly missed. Lorenzo was succeeded by his son Piero, who was a far cry from his father's magnificence. He squandered much of the money inherited by Lorenzo and managed to bring down entirely the Medici dynasty in Florence. Piero's weak leadership and failure to counter the French invasion led to the Medici's exile in 1494, which was a stark contrast to Lorenzo's diplomatic triumphs. Luckily, Lorenzo's second son, Giovanni, would manage to retake Florence in 1512 with the help of a Spanish army. But things weren't exactly as Lorenzo would have liked. Giovanni would go on to become Pope Leo X and secured Florence not for his family, but for the Catholic Church. Although Giovanni's papacy restored Medici influence, his focus more on ecclesiastical power shifted the family's legacy away from Florence's republican ideals, something Lorenzo would probably have viewed with mixed feelings. For all his troubles, Lorenzo's reputation as a ruler has remained a positive one. He played a key role in shaping the political and artistic landscape of Florence during the Italian Renaissance. Diplomatically, his leadership brought about peace and stability, and he was there when Florence needed saving from external threats. Looking back on this period in history As well as Lorenzo's legacy, it seems perfectly fitting that he was and is known as the Magnificent. Thanks for watching History Expose. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us. Don't forget to visit our main page, Factinate, for more incredible facts about everything.